before I start, we have an excellent panel. I mean, one of the best I've had the pleasure of working with, and it represents, I think, almost 80% or 90% of the Commonwealth. I mean, it's from all over the Commonwealth. And so you will get a very diversified view of what's happening. This session, if you recall from the program, deals with the international trends in government performance management. That is really the task that we have been given, to capture international trend in government performance management. So I thought, before I ask our distinguished panel, I mean, as I said, all leading practitioners who have spent a lot of time thinking and doing this stuff, not just thinking about it, but actually doing and practicing. So they'll bring real insights into what the trends are. But I thought I will provide a background as to how I see in my work and my career, how the trends have panned out. So I would like to start with a small overview, and then I'll go to the panel and introduce them, and then each one of them will make their presentation. And at the end, we will have time for question, answer, discussion. But I would suggest that after each panel, maybe we could allow a couple of questions just for clarification. But if they are related questions to other panel members, then we will, deal with them at the end of the session. So with that said, let me share my screen. And so this then is our panel. And I don't want to, I'm the moderator, so I don't want to make a presentation. Excuse me. But here is just an overview, how I see it. And just to put everything that my panel will be, my colleagues in the panel will be speaking about in perspective. When I look at the trends in government performance management, I divide them into two broad categories. One trend that was from the 1990 to 2005. I'll not go into the historic trends, but just the more recent ones. And the other one is from 2005, roughly. It's not the exact year that something happened, but to the current time. These are the two, and hopefully we can see. Let me start with the first trend. The first one was like this. If you can see what I see on my screen, and I hope you can, you will find that the first trend was people were excited in the 1989, around that time, to move from bureaucracy to market type mechanism, from administrator to manager type mechanisms. And therefore, the entire world kind of shifted to this quadrant in the lower right-hand side, and New Zealand being the farthest. And that's why this whole new branch of new public management came into being, because New Zealand and other countries followed. So this is sort of dated picture, but other countries have moved, but they basically moved in this quadrant. And that was the first big trend. As you know, in New Zealand, they abolished the title of permanent secretary, and they started calling their permanent secretaries as chief executive officer of the Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That was one big thing, and they put all of them on performance agreement. These were the two big changes in government performance management. They did other things in financial management, but in government performance management that they abolished, they thought of them as managers. They call them chief executives, and put them on performance agreements with clear targets and started holding them accountable. So that was the first big trend. Then the next big trend was, I would say, falls under the generally accepted performance principles. The current, and having, as the Secretary General pointed out, having looked at 1,200 people who are all working in this area, taking their views, this sort of summarizes what has been happening since 2005. And I think the landmark event, why I usually take 2004 and 5, things were happening before that in South Korea and other places. But Kenya, a country that is represented on this panel, and Mr. Magua will be speaking about it, was among the first countries to start this trend. And I will talk about this trend, which is basically summarized in the generally accepted performance principle. This is generally accepted. It doesn't mean that they're satisfying every single principle and to the best of their ability, but the trend is in that direction, and that is important. But allow me to also take a moment to recognize the giant who made this transition to this second phase was the president of Kenya at that time, Mr. Mbaki, who unfortunately just a few hours back, we've got the news that he has passed away. And so it's a big loss. Our heart goes out to my Kenyan friends, and I'm saddened because I worked with him when I followed. He was a professor of economics in Kenya, in Nairobi. And when he came to power, he said the kinds of things he did, and Mr. Magua will tell you that story much better than I can, really started the trend towards generally accepted performance principles. They were among the first pioneers under President Mbaki to move and fine-tune what the first trend represented. I don't want to go through all the generally accepted performance principles, but someone has to do it because the panelists will be talking about it, and you will identify all these presentations, including the presentations by the panelists, will be available to you. So you don't need to really worry about details on the screen, and I will skip through it in the interest of time, even though we do have enough time, but I want to listen to the presentations. So as the Secretary General has said, Professor Holzer, can't thank him enough. He has been instrumental in sort of helping us sort this out, and together with him, under his leadership, frankly, we have kind of identified 16 good practices, you can call them principles. And these are longish things. I'll just go through it. But basically, I'll give you a summary statement rather than read this. The principle one is that you must use the right approach for performance management. You can't use an audit approach. You can't use ex post approach of going later on and doing research, randomized controlled trial, which won the Nobel Prize. They are fantastic things, but they are for different purpose. Not every evaluation technique is meant for government performance management. And that's the first big principle and it's common sense, that the managers must be told before they start their job what is expected from them. So this basically says that you must have a prior agreement as to exactly what they are supposed to do. And you'll be surprised, often governments just go ex post after the fact when the horses have left the stable and they talk about it. Second principle says that you must have the right methodology for evaluating. And this is also, just to summarize it, I don't want to belabor the point, that at the end, as the Secretary General said, three people looking at the same government department and the same facts should come to the same conclusion. And we believe, as Mr. Magua and the other panelists who are pretty much in this, following this trend, will explain that calculating the composite score, that coming to a bottom line in government is very important. It can't be impressionistic. It has to be, and therefore you must prioritize what you are doing, and you must agree how you will measure deviations from your target. It can't be subjective. It has to be a bit more objective. All that is under principle. Three is that it should cover whole of government. If you cover part of the government, the inefficiency travels to the other part of the government. So if you really believe an effective government means whole of government, not part of it. And it should start at the top, not the way usually it is done, that you start accountability for junior people and not at the very top. And accountability does not trickle up, it only trickles down. So that's the fourth principle. Fifth is that the accountability for results and delivery must be assigned explicitly. It should not be left like the malaria program did not work. Malaria program did not work. It's not the program that's at fault, it's the manager, and you must assign accountability to the management of the malaria program and not the malaria program itself. Then it must have an appropriate incentive system. No matter how sophisticated a system you have, beyond a point, it doesn't work if there are no consequences, good or bad consequences, either positive or negative. Incentives, we are all responsive to incentives. So you can have a theoretically perfect system, but if it does not have consequences, either way, positive or negative, it remains an academic exercise. It's very important, we found, and countries are working on that. You will hear from the panelists what they have done. Then it should be integrated with human resource management. It should not be that everybody in the department is getting 9 out of 10, but the department is getting 4 out of 10. That kind of thing can't happen, that excellent people working in a poor department, that's just not, seem reasonable. Moving on, it should be integrated with the budget system. It should not be delinked. You must, for every key performance indicator, you must know how much you're spending, and that is the new trend integration. And this is real performance budgeting, not the way it was done earlier, where it was kind of a mechanical, artificial. This is a much more organic approach to performance budgeting. Should be transparent, and this is very important for the credibility and the effectiveness of. So we found the principle number 9 for generally accepted performance principle is that it must be transparent. And there are various ways you will see the cases will present, and you can ask them how they're working on transparency. One of the ways the countries do it is they put the accountability, whether they call it performance agreement, performance contract, as in Kenya, or commitment for results, as in many countries, they're put on the website of the department so they know exactly what is expected. There should be appropriate institutional arrangement for managing GPMS. It should not be left at some lower level. It doesn't work. It's a leadership function, and unless it's done at the highest office, and you will find that there is no coincidence. Then when we look for people who are working in performance management, and where good examples of successful examples, they're all based in the President or Prime Minister's office. It cannot happen anywhere else. I too, when I was looking after India's performance management, I was in the Prime Minister's office. The government should employ an effective strategic communication, something very underrated, but everybody recognizes, while they may not be doing an excellent communication, but communication is very important part of performance management. That's what we found. GPMS should have a strong and unambiguous legal foundation, something that the Secretary General referred to, that GEPRA, the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993, even today is there. Hate to say presidents have come and gone. Not every president was supportive, but they had no choice. The system has continued, though it was modernized, and there is a GEPRA Modernization Act of 2010. You will get to hear a lot about it later in the, Dr. Shelley Metzenbaum was in charge around that time, and she has great perspective on that. Mr. John Kaminsky has written extensively on that. It should have multiple objectives, should not be single. It should be citizen-driven, that citizens would feel that they have an input, not that, oh, you had your own targets. So there should be citizen-centric. Knowledge management should be an integral part of government performance management. It should not be just, you must learn a lesson from what is going on. It is not simply to say that I got you, or to punish or promote people. It is also to learn. Learning government and knowledge-driven government is an effective government which learns from its mistakes. Mistakes all of us make, but what have you learned? And that's important. And finally, of course, countries come up with these great reforms, but they can't sustain it. So sustaining momentum, and there are principles and experience that Professor Holzer and I have listed in the paper, which everybody has access to, and we'll be happy to share with you. So those are the principles. So when people say GAP principles, you are able to do. We have put them in simple one word, the same things. The first one deals with methodology, the structure, etc. This allows us better comparison. People can come to the same conclusion, and you can see we can even quantify the quality of government evaluation system. This is a peer evaluation that was done, and later on, Mr. Nazrul Islam, when discussing Bangladesh, he will talk about this, that how it was possible. So all these things are possible, and you can come to the same conclusion if you have a system of generally accepted performance principle. And this is not rocket science. In the private sector, we have generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. And that is why when they make a $300 million profit, the entire world agrees that that's the right profit, because they have used the same definitions, and when they are externally audited, they also come to the same conclusion. So I think our aspiration is to reach that point where people, when doing an external audit, come to the same conclusion, that whether it's good, bad, or ugly. Now, I want to start. Our first speaker would be Ms. Susan Ntema from Namibia. And as you can see, she is, the director does not capture. Director means she is the czar of performance management in the Office of Prime Minister in Government of Namibia, and she will share her experience as to what they are doing. The trend in Namibia will give you a sense of international trends, because they are on the cutting edge. That will be followed by Mr. John Magua, who is the Director for Performance Management and who has dedicated his career on performance management. And ever since, as I said, when Mr. Mbaki had just been sworn in, he was there. And when this revolution started, and he is now there. So he has got a good perspective on the trends around the world. He has access to all the information, and he will be our next panelist. By the way, we have detailed profiles. I apologize. They have very distinguished backgrounds, but we will send you all of that, their presentations and profiles later on. But for now, I'm just giving you a thumb sketch of what they have done. They'll be followed by the Honorable Dr. Shantal Munro-Knight, who is the minister in the Prime Minister's office. Incredible experience from private sector, and now she is all the kudos to the Prime Minister of Barbados. You will see in her presentation how serious Barbados is about this effort, and that they have assigned a minister to look after and make sure that this succeeds. More on that when she speaks. Dr. Emmanuel Meribole, who is a permanent secretary in the Office of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation in Nigeria. It's not a fair thing. I will be putting him on the spot, because even the head of the Civil Service of the Federation, I found, was so committed that it leaves Dr. Meribole no choice but to be committed, because he has a very strong commitment in this office of the head of the Civil Service of the Federation, which is like the Cabinet Secretariat. She is Cabinet Secretary of Nigeria. Mr. Nazrul Islam, among the pioneers in this, he was the one who started this revolution, big change in performance management in Bangladesh. So we will tell you firsthand the story of Bangladesh, how, and by all accounts, when we did the workshop in Asia, it was #1, but we also had a competition in Malta some time back, and it was a peer evaluation by the audience. And again, Bangladesh was rated as #1 in terms of government performance management. So I look forward to that experience as well. So you can see we have an exciting panel with enormously enriching presentations. We might not be able to do justice because we have a time limit, and I have been told to monitor the time very carefully, which I shall try. But I know my panelists are very kind, and they have agreed that they will all take about less than 10 minutes and then take a few questions, and that will be for today. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing, and that's all I have in terms of introduction. And before I invite Ms. Susan Ntema to make a presentation, if there are any other comments. Arun, do you have any comments or?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Trivedi. It is really fascinating, and thank you for giving us your view on generally accepted performance principles. And I think it is really time that we have a global conversation on performance principles, and there is a global consensus, as rightly pointed out by our distinguished speaker, Secretary General, that there needs to be some consensus on performance measures, and it's time for a global consensus on performance measures. So thank you for giving us the overview.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Ms. Ntema, the floor is yours. Please take it from here. We can see you can put it in the slide view. Yeah, thank you. We can't hear you. Maybe you need to unmute. I had difficulty unmuting. It's not easy. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I had the same issue. Mary, please allow Ms. Ntema to, yeah, because I was not able to do it myself. I think the host has to allow you, Ms. Ntema. Or Arun, can you unmute?
Yes,
Yeah.
Dr.
Okay.
Trivedi, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Professor, for the humbling introduction. Good morning to all those that are in Europe, and good afternoon to those that are in Africa. My name is Ms. Susan Ntema. I'm the Director responsible for performance improvement in the Office of the Prime Minister in Namibia. Before I start, let me just register our sincere condolences to our colleagues from Kenya for the loss. It's all our loss. I will present the case study for Namibia in terms of the international trends in government performance management. The presentation outline will look like we will follow the profile of Namibia, our performance management framework, what is it that we have achieved, the key challenges Namibia experienced when implementing the performance management system, and the key lessons that we have learned through the commitment for results and the way forward and the expected changes. This is Namibia. It's a sovereign and democratic unitary state that is located in Southern Africa. It's bordered by the Atlantic Ocean in the west, Angola and Zambia in the north, Botswana in the east, and South Africa in southern east. Namibia got her independence on the 21st of March, 1990, and it has a surface area of 824,290 square kilometers. It's a vast country, and the population size is 2.5 million. We have the three organs of state, which is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. We also have the three tiers of government being central. Central, we mean we have offices, ministries, and agencies with a total of 30. And we have regional councils. There are 14 in total. And we have local authorities, which are municipalities, villages, and settlements that are located in various regional councils. The top structure of the Namibian government, we have the president, who is the head of state, supported by the vice president and the prime minister. The prime minister is the head of public administration in Namibia, and she's supported by the secretary to the cabinet. And we have the deputy prime minister and various ministers that are heading different ministries. Just to give a quick background to where we are coming from in terms of performance management system implementation in Namibia, to indicate that this is one of the the reform initiatives that was introduced by government since 2009. It has been rolled out in ministries, and in 2011, we had a performance management policy that was endorsed, and the management of the entire public service is done through the Public Service Act number 13 of 1995. And to indicate that, see, when it started in 2009, up to somewhere in 2014, the main focus was mainly on having strategic plans, having annual plans and performance agreements, especially on the lower levels. But this received momentum in 2015-16 financial year, with the introduction of signing of performance agreements on the top level structures of government, being the ministers. They started to sign performance agreements with His Excellency, and as well as executive directors who are the accounting officers of various ministries. They signed performance agreements with the Secretariat to Cabinet, which is also co-signed by the aligned respective ministers. So to date, we are happy to indicate that the signing and the review of performance agreements to us is done quarterly. It's been conducted, especially on the top structures of government. And this reform is championed by the Secretary to Cabinet, very passionate about it, as well as the executive directors. They are mandated to facilitate performance management in their respective ministries. One of the principles of performance management in Namibia currently is that it is linked to non-monetary rewards. When someone does well, it's the prerogative of the accounting officer to award, whether through a certificate or a praise or any other means but that is non-monetary. I just want to share with you our performance management framework. As you can see, just to give a snapshot to say, our performance management framework is anchored on Namibia's Vision 2030, which is to have an industrialized Namibia developed by her human resources, enjoying peace and stability. The vision is implemented through the national development plans. We normally have 5-year national development plans in place. That is a tool to implement the Vision 2030. And when the national agendas are set in the national development plans, every ministry does extract what is due to them and do the strategic plans. We have strategic plans. Our strategic plans time period is 5 years, and the time period for the strategic plans of all the ministries is aligned to the national development plan time period, which is also 5 years. Annually, the ministry is expected to do an annual plan, which is further cascaded into performance agreements, and attached to the performance agreement is a personal development plan on the competencies that are required to enhance or to enable the staff member to perform. Key achievements in Namibia is that all our ministries have strategic plans, which are 5 years, and those plans are aligned to the national development plans, and that performance management is on top of the agenda, especially of His Excellency, the President, Dr. Hage Geingob. Yearly, the President signs, and normally every time he will have quarterly review sessions with each line minister. And when it comes to executive directors, the Secretary to Cabinet, at the end of every quarter, he conducts a one-on-one session to sit with each executive director to assess performance on set targets. The performance agreements of all the ministers are published on the Office of the Prime Minister website. And to date, we can happily say about 50% of all the staff members in the public service, they have gone into signing performance agreements. Of course, we still have another batch to go, especially on the lower levels, to get it done on that level and for them to understand why do we do performance management. Key challenges, as it's common, has been the misalignment between individual performance versus the organizational performance. You will find in many instances, the Honorable Minister will score a 90, but when you look at the results on the ground, it leaves much to be desired when it comes to that specific performance area. So we identified that gap, and it's work in progress to mitigate that. The absence of a system to judge organizational performance holistically is still a challenge with us. I will highlight what we are doing to that regard. Insufficient evaluation methodology, no criteria values. Yes, this is something we are learning, and this is the trend where we are moving to adopt the gap principles that we have performance criteria set in advance, and we come up with composite performance scores. Our performance management currently is same manual. We have Excel spreadsheets, but we all know the limitations with Excel. That is, it's not a database. So we have been looking and searching for a database for our performance management system. The absence of non-monetary performance rewards is one of those principles that has been challenged by public servants to say, you know, we need more than a certificate, we need more than a praise. Can this be attached to some salary increments or so? We have learned Namibia is one of those, and we are very much delighted. We have received technical support from the Commonwealth on the enhancement of our performance management system. The Commonwealth have lended a good hand to Namibia to introduce the concept of commitment for results, and also share with us the strategic management and accountability for results toolkit, which is a software to manage the commitment for results. So we are happy that Namibia have received that support, and we just finished our first round of training of all technical staff in all the ministries, and this training was attended by all the executive directors in the government of Namibia. The Secretary to Cabinet was also part, and he shared some remarks at that session. So Namibia is passionate to adopt the GAP principles by adopting also the commitment for result concept and using the smart software to mitigate the challenges that I have alluded to. Even in the recent statement by His Excellency, he alluded also to he appreciated the support by the Commonwealth and indicated that as Namibia, we need to move and we need to run to adopt these good principles of managing government performance. The way forward in Namibia currently is that we are in consultation with the Commonwealth so that the smart software can be deployed. And as I have indicated, for Namibia, we already have performance agreements, especially for the top structures. So it will just be an issue of migrating from what we currently have and migrate that into a commitment for results that will be done via the smart platform. And we are just in consultations in few months to come. When the software is deployed, we'll transfer all executive directors and ministers' performance agreement into a commitment for results. And we anticipate to roll out to the whole structures of government in the next financial year 2023. And also once we have the credible system that you are able to evaluate performance, we'll be able to link it to staff mobility in terms of promotions, even to start to offer some monetary incentives based on the credible evaluation system. And through that, we'll also be able to start to award and celebrate good performance, both on an individual level and on an organizational level. So that is the expected changes in Namibia, that we embrace the commitment for results. We will be happy to link the commitment for results to the budget, and we will be able to prioritize, especially focus on the expected results, the results that the citizens want to see. And at the end of the day, if we are able to increase the citizen satisfaction, that will be a very good government. So Namibia, the trend for us is to move into adopting the GAP principles and use the right approach to measure government performance. So I submit. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Ntema. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, you put it so clearly. But we do have time for audience to ask a few questions, if you don't mind. I mean, if they have questions of clarification mostly, but because we can have a more substantive discussion once we have listened to everyone, and then we'll have plenty of time. The way I see, time is not an issue, at least that's the advantage of being the first panel. We've gained some time. Thank you. So any questions? I don't know. Professor Manoharan and Mary, you'll have to tell us because I can't see raised hands. So if there are no questions, then I will just basically, I'm not able to see questions. So someone else will have to, and you just have to start asking questions. But just to summarize, I hope you've seen that the first half of Namibia's experience, as outlined so clearly by Ms. Susan Ntema, and I thank her for the very succinct and to the point presentation. You can see that they had gone through the kind of changes that new public management had recommended, and that the ones till 2005, that you change the title of permanent secretaries to executive directors. So they followed that similar trend. And they did change, they put them on performance agreements, and that was also part of the earlier first trend. But where they hit the ceiling, so to speak, was all this is good. But at the end, the evaluation was a problem. That was a problem in New Zealand, Australia, and I submit, I really shudder to do so, but I will take a chance because Mr. John Kaminsky will be later on, and he may beg to differ. But the fact is that performance plans under GEPRA and performance agreements also could not be evaluated because, they had several criteria, just like in Namibia before this recent change. And let's say out of 15 things, you do 10 things. How do you know whether it's good or bad performance? It depends on what those 10 things were. If you did all the most important things and left out some 5% of unimportant things, then it's great performance. So prioritization is an essential, necessary condition for the success of this approach of new public management, and that many countries did not do, and therefore performance agreements were evaluated in a subjective manner, saying, okay, you got most of the things done, or you didn't get most of the things. 2 people or 3 people, experts looking at it could come to 3 different conclusions. Similarly, deviations, as pointed out by Ms. Ntema, the deviations, even till 2021, 22, they were using single point targets. So if you have a target for 700 kilometers of road and you make 655 kilometers, is it good or bad? And I would submit that it would depend. If you like the person, you say it's close enough. If you don't, you say, well, that's your problem. You're a good man, but you don't achieve your targets. And so they've moved on these 2 fronts. They have already got a very solid foundation. They have got commitment. All they are doing is just a 5–10% improvement, which I believe will have an 80% impact on the quality of the system. This is a small change, but a major impact, because they already have the infrastructure of a good performance management system in place. They have institutions, they have commitment, they have the practice of doing performance agreements. They have changed the titles to send a message that it's nothing is permanent. You're an executive director, you have to deliver things, and all that they have done. for which they must be recognized and given credit. It's the last mile, as they say, that they are fixing, which will really bring the entire benefits to them. And that may be one way to go about it. All right. Ntema, I will let people ask questions when they have. So we will continue with our original plan. Arun, I see your hand is up.
Yes, Dr. Trivedi, we do have a question. If you would like me to ask it right now, or maybe.
Yes, absolutely. I think we have the time, so we are ahead of the game today.
Thank you, Dr. Trivedi. So we have two questions, both on the same point. So can you please explain what do you mean by misalignment between the individual performance and organizational performance? And what are the main causes of this misalignment?
Ms. Ntema?
Thank you for the good question. Actually, what it means is that you will have an individual scoring high while the organization is scoring low. It's just like what Professor Trivedi just indicated. So what is causing that is actually not having the right approach to making the targets, having the ex ante targets to say if you achieve this, you will be evaluated like this. So these are some of the issues that will be mitigated through adopting the GAP principle.
Thank you.
Thank you for the response. We have just one more question coming in. So how significant is the lack of financial incentives to performance, and how is staff mobility presently achieved?
Ms. Ntema?
Ntema?
Ms. Ntema, you're muted. I think someone has muted you. Professor Manoharan, yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I was muted. I could not. Yeah. I could not unmute. I did not touch on the previous background to say where we are coming from. Where we are coming from, we have monetary incentives to performance. We have an appraisal system, and through the research or the evaluation that was done, the emphasis was mostly on money and not performance. So it was stopped. So for the previous few years, it has been non-monetary. Of course, understanding where we are coming from when we used to have monetary or appraisal system in place. So, and one of the issues was that we need to let the performance management system mature until a certain stage where we inculcate that culture and the staff members understand why we do things. Then is when it will be linked to monetary rewards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ntema. That's a very good point, and I hope people listening would take note of it, because it is not, we are dealing with public money, and these systems take a while to mature. And my experience is that they should be introduced, financial incentives, non-monetary incentives should be introduced immediately. Certificate by the president, award for excellence, all those things. But monetary, there is a fiduciary responsibility. And if later on somebody finds out that the signal was not right, that the target was soft or something, so give some time for all the bugs to be decoded and debugged. And when you're confident that you've got enough checks and balances and the system is giving more or less the current signal, then it is in fact absolutely necessary to have some strong financial incentives. And there's plenty of evidence that they do miracles where they work. But prematurely, as Ms. Ntema has rightly pointed out, I would think twice before introducing right away. So that's the basic point. Thank you very much. Any other questions, Professor Manoharan? You see,
Yes, Dr. Trivedi, we just have one more question. If okay. So the question is, can you please elaborate on why 50% of the staff sign the performance agreements, and what happens to the other half? What challenges does it create in terms of staff motivation and discontent?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. I have highlighted on the issue of our performance management system, especially the understanding when it comes to the lower levels. And also the active management. Performance management requires active management of that line supervisor to make sure that those who report to him or her, they do sign. So it's work in progress. The good thing is that on the top level structures, which is the cream of government performance, it's done very well. Where we are lacking is bringing it lower down. And one of the causes we have realized is also when it comes to our implementation tools, our performance management tools, especially that we don't have a system in place. We use these manual forms, and it's a bit tedious to fill in these forms, submit wherever it needs to be submitted. So that's why we are hopeful that with the smart toolkit we'll be able to alleviate all these hurdles, and everyone will come on board, especially the top structures. The rest of the staff members, yes, it's a work in progress to sensitize, to create more awareness on the importance of performance management. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we actually have one more question, if that's okay, Dr. Trivedi.
Yes, yes.
From your experience, can you share some strategies to break through the silos in national government and address major issues facing the country?
Thank you, Mr. Berman. I mean, I think that's, I hope that's for me. I will be happy to answer that, and then Ms. Ntema can take another cut at it. I'm speaking on behalf of many of the countries where I've had experience. So Evan, the way to do it would be as follows. Most countries the countries I'm aware of where it has succeeded, and I can talk to you separately about the details, is that you have to have a concept of team targets in the performance, in the commitment for results or performance agreements. A team target is, for example, in India, the Prime Minister wanted to increase the electricity generation by a huge amount, and we had a similar commitment for result document called the Results Framework Document. Now, in India at least, I can tell you for a fact, there are 5 government departments involved in increasing or producing electricity. One is the coal, Ministry of Coal. You can produce the coal, but to get the coal to the plants, you have Ministry of Railways. If that doesn't work, the coal can sit where it has been produced. Ministry of Railways can get it to the plants, but the plants, if they're not maintained by the Department of Heavy Industries, because it's a public enterprise, most of them are public sector plants, then again, it's no good. The coal is there, but the plant is not working. So you need maintenance and upkeep of that. All that could be good, but the Ministry of Environment can throw a wrench and say, look, we are committed to Paris climate targets and, take it easy. Ministry of Energy, of course, as a regulator is there. So all these are involved. So what the government of India did, this is not a theoretical example, the Prime Minister decided to have a team target. They said, you will get some credit for producing coal, but there will be some points given for team. It's not an individual race, but it's a relay race, not a solo. So if whoever drops the baton, the whole team will lose. The team part will be lost. You can claim your individual best score, etc., but that is separate. So therefore, team targets introduced in performance agreement or performance contract seems to be one of the most effective ways to move forward. So I would say that. Ms. Ntema, unless you want to add something, we can move on to the next presentation. Just because we've got some time doesn't mean we have to just focus on and impose on Ms. Ntema. We can move on to the next, but I see there is another hand up, but that would be the last one. And then we need to move to Kenya. Professor Manoharan, do you know who that was? I didn't see the name. I saw one hand, that's all. But it's okay, we can come back later. Let's start with the Kenyan case, and then we can combine it with the next round of questions and answers. Is that all right?
Sure, Dr. Trivedi. I think we can definitely ask in the next,
Next, yeah, let's do that. Maybe the same issues will come up here. So Mr. Magua, as I've already introduced, will give you his more detailed. I've known him ever since he was in public enterprises, where the government of Kenya introduced the system, as he will tell you, in public enterprises, where he was in charge in the public enterprises, and now he is in the government. He is overall in charge of this whole performance management there, and among the most experienced in the Commonwealth, I would say, performance managers in terms of the longevity and the depth and the extent. He will tell you, if you ask him questions, how far and wide the Kenyan system has gone. And instead of my giving you hints, let Mr. Magua kindly explain. Mr. Magua, the floor is entirely yours. You're also muted.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. And
thank you very much. Again, as a pressure, I want to say a good morning, a good afternoon to all the distinguished delegates. And thank you too for your condolences. As you are now aware, we lost our third president this morning. The news just came this afternoon from the president. We say this is a father of our commitment for results framework, because it is during his tenure that Kenya introduced performance contracting. Nevertheless, allow me to then engage you for about 10 or so minutes to take you through the Kenyan case of the commitment for results framework.
you're muted.
So,
yeah,
you can hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Very good. So that's the outline of my presentation. I'll give you a brief profile of the Republic of Kenya, Kenya's commitment for results framework, the best practices. I'll also share with you the linkage of performance management to national planning, trends in government performance management, and some current reforms that we are going through. I'll also mention one or two challenges that may not be in my presentation. The brief profile of the Republic of Kenya, as you may be aware, some of you, maybe not all of you, Kenya is located in East Africa, lies in the equator, with a population of 47 million as at the last census of 2019. We have a unitary state with a national government and 47 county governments. You'll be surprised that Kenya is home to the Great Rift Valley that runs all the way from South Africa. Kenya is also home to what we call the Great Five wildlife. It is in Kenya that you'll be able to see leopards, rhinos, elephants, buffaloes, and also lions. We have a coastline that has very wonderful pristine beaches in our second city of Mombasa. And we also host the 8th wonder of the world, the annual wild beast migration that occurs every year between Kenya and our sister country, Tanzania. That map shows you exactly where Kenya lies, right at the equator. So you can imagine that we have a weather that is favorable throughout the year. On the eastern end, you have the Indian Ocean, and this is the stretch that you will have, or you will find very, very beautiful beaches. Let me go then to the thrust of the matter and take you through Kenya's commitment for result framework, which in our case we
We lost you. Mr. Magua, can't hear. We can see the presentation, but not hear you.
Resort framework.
Yeah.
You can't hear?
No, we missed
about now?
last. Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So I indicated that performance contracting started in 1990, but there was a minimal uptake then for obvious reasons that as I advance in my presentation, you'll be able to get the reasons of that. However, we reintroduced coordinated performance management through what we call the Economic Recovery Strategy for Wealth and Employment Creation. Around the same time that Professor mentioned, 2003, 2008, precisely between that period of 2004, this is the period that our commitment for result framework really of public offices were then placed on annual performance contracts. Of course, from the first level, the cabinet secretaries cascaded down to the principal secretaries. So in a nutshell, we could say that before 2004, at least in the Kenyan scenario, performance management was largely based on ex-post approach, really concentrating only at the individual employee level, and not really at the organizational level. And therefore, there was no institutionalized performance management at institutional level. Fast forward, and we are now talking about 2022. We are now on our 17th cycle of continuous implementation of performance contracting since 2004. In July, coming July, as we start a new financial year, we'll hit the 18th cycle of continuous implementation. Now, all ministries, including including State House, where the president sits, Office of the Deputy President, Office of the Attorney General, state corporations, and tertiary institutions, all these are now classifications of institutions that are placed on annual performance contracts every financial year. And the same are then cascaded to downstream institutions. So currently we have 394 public institutions, at least in the executive, that are on first level performance contract. This is, for example, where the president has a performance contract with a cabinet secretary. This is where we have a state corporation signing a performance contract and so forth. Interestingly, our second arm of government, which is the judiciary, is also implementing performance contracts, heavily borrowed from what pertains in the executive, because in our case, we started with the executive, then later on, the judiciary has also picked up that model. And as I indicated, we have 47 county governments. A number of them also have picked up the issue of performance contracting. Indeed, also some constitutional commissions have also come on board, and they are implementing performance contracts. Now, this is the cycle that defines our Kenyan system of performance contracting. I don't have to go through the whole of it, but let me just point out where my cursor is. This is normally what gives commencement of our commitment for result framework every year. Review of performance contracting guidelines, which we normally do around May. Today, I've just received a circular that is going to all the cabinet secretaries, requiring them now send stakeholders from their various ministries for a session that we are going to have the second week of May, where we bring together all the ministries as stakeholders to then review the performance contracting guidelines that are going to then inform the performance contracts for the upcoming financial year from July. I don't have to go through all those cycles, but allow me also to mention that the last stage, the last stage is also the release of the performance evaluation results. 2 weeks ago, the performance evaluation results for the previous financial year, 2020-2021, were we also do the ranking. So we allow them, and then we are going to get a feedback from them as we move on. Now, what are the best practices in performance management in Kenya? Government performance management, then the same are also subject with the performance contracting guidelines. Then performance monitoring, reporting, and feedback is undertaken on quarterly basis. So every quarter, the institutions take stock and prepare quarterly reports and then submit them to institutions that have also been put in place to analyze these reports and provide feedback. We also do a media performance review. We did this for all ministries in January and February, did a report, shared the report with the cabinet and also with all the ministries. Annual performance evaluation is undertaken based on composite scoring, and I think for me this is very important because the achievements are subjected to the criteria values, then to obtain the raw scores. And once we have the raw scores for each performance indicator, the same are then subjected to the weight allocated to each of those performance indicators to obtain the weighted scores. And once you have the weighted scores for all the performance indicators, then you sum them up, and then you are able to obtain a composite score, which is a reflection of the total performance of that institution. And therefore, using the composite score, you are able to know whether that institution achieved its performance targets or not. And the composite scoring is based on 5 grades in our case. We have excellent grade, very good grade, and then a poor grade, all with very distinct levels of achievement. Evaluation is undertaken by an external team from Public Service Performance Management and Monitoring Unit, where I sit. This gives a bit of some objectivity to the evaluation process. And once the evaluation is undertaken, a report is prepared thereof and submitted to cabinet. It would be very interesting to note that in our case, we have 2 levels or 2 stratas of evaluation. We have what we call self-evaluation by the respective institution. So the institution first undertakes a self-evaluation. After that, then that self-evaluation is subjected now to an external team that is not part of that institution. That way you then are able to achieve some degree of objectivity in the process. A report is then prepared and submitted to cabinet. As I've just indicated, the one for the previous financial year was just released 2 weeks ago. Now, this office that I've mentioned is the office in charge of performance contracting in government, which is domiciled in the presidency and currently under the Ministry of Public Service. The evaluation is undertaken through the Government Performance Contracting Information System. This is an online system that we have developed, and it is in our 3rd year of rollout. It's part of harnessing technology to be able to then effectively undertake or coordinate performance contracting in our government. What you see on the screen is very, very, very important for our case, what we call the linkage of performance management to planning, because we don't want to implement performance management as a disconnect initiative from the national planning framework. So we have a very nice linkage between the performance management and the existing national planning framework. And I'll be able to demonstrate. We have what we call the Kenya Vision 2030, a 30-year planning instrument that is implemented through 5-year plans. We call them medium-term plan. The third one is just coming to an end. Then the new financial year, we are going to start the fourth. Then we require also every public institution derive a strategic plan from that medium-term plan. And then from the strategic plan, derive an annual work plan. And when you have an annual work plan, you start now having clarity in the intention of what you want to achieve. And within this annual work plan, this is now where also the issue of budgeting comes on board. So once you have your budget and you have your annual work plan, that now it's very easy for you now to put in place the performance management system, because you now are able to craft your performance contracts. You are able to develop individual performance, individual performance employee system. In our case, we call it staff performance appraisal system. And then you are able to come up with several other tools that are supportive of the main commitment for result framework, which is the performance contract. So you can see there's a clear linkage between the national planning instrument and the specific commitment for result framework that an institution has put in place. Let me go to the trends in government performance management in the case of Kenya. Number one is top placement of the office in charge of performance management. As I have indicated to you, our office is in the presidency under one ministry of public service. We recognize that because then we are able then to coordinate the performance management framework to the other institutions. The other trend is continuous implementation of the commitment for result framework that is in place, despite regime changes. So we introduced our framework back in 2004, and that has survived even though we have had regime changes, because the regimes that come on board are able to recognize that this is a tool that has able to survive all those years, and therefore is a tool that can be used to deliver the mandate of regimes that come on board. The other trend that we have also liked in our country is the annual release of performance evaluation results, because this is a very strong feedback. When you release the results back, is a very good feedback that gives the impetus to the whole concept of performance management. There is also deployment of performance incentives or sanctions. In our case, we also have what is called presidential rotating office. We also have institutions that deploy what is called the 13th salary. The last evaluation results that we released, that is the year's financial year 2019-2020, we had one of the highest office in land, that is State House. It was in position number two. And what that office did was just a simple incentive, just host a staff party where the top management of that office then are able to interact with the staff on a very relaxed mood, where really no monetary issues were there. It was just a dinner, and that is part of deployment of performance incentives. The extension of the commitment for result framework to other arms of government, as I indicated during my introduction, yes, the executive is on performance contract, but the same has been rolled to the judiciary and also to the county governments and also constitutional commissions. Consistency of the framework with the generally accepted performance principles. We see our performance contracting system is consistent with the generally accepted performance principles, apart from only one, and that is the principle on requirement to have a legal framework. So far, we don't have what we would call a legal framework, but despite that, our system has survived the 17 years because there has been commitment from the top management of the country. The other trend is automation of government performance management. And in our case, I've just mentioned that we have put in place what is called Government Performance Contracting Information System, which is in our third year of rollout. Yes, the last 1 year is registration on government performance management, which I think going forward becomes also an important cog in the whole concept of performance management. That, delegates, brings me to the end of my interaction with you. But as I said, in my presentation, I have not picked out the challenges. Allow me to share with you one challenge that I see our commitment for result framework is experiencing. Now, based on the concept of what gets measured gets done, and you recall the Secretary General in her opening remarks, she mentioned about this concept. So everyone now, every institution that has a national mandate now wants to put their mandate into the performance contract, because they believe that if they do that, then there is a high degree of that being achieved by the institutions, the implementing institutions, and largely, therefore, their mandate gets achieved. So this, to me, is a challenge that we have now seen, because it is now eating into the core mandate of an institution. I want to be very practical here. We have one of our criteria in our performance contract tool is what we call cross-cutting performance indicators. At the moment, we have 11 performance criteria from original 5. So we have an issue where every government agency is pushing its agenda into the performance contracting. And the effect of that is that then creates a lot of fatigue in the institutions that are implementing performance contracts, because most of their time then gets refocused to those cross-cutting performance indicators rather than what we call the core mandate of the institution. That, to me, I would say is one challenge that our system is facing, and is an issue that we want to raise during our upcoming review of the performance contracting guidelines. Thank you very much, Honorable Delegates.
Thank you very much, Mr. Magua. What seemed like a great, this is fascinating. Each time I listen, I get further insights into Mr. Magua's efforts and also Kenya's great experiment. But I just to highlight 2 or 3 things that stand to me. Number one, that it is 17 years long, so it's a very long effort, and kudos to them and all. They don't have a legislation, but there is so much political consensus there. Different governments have come but they've continued to do so. In fact, the commitment seems to be increasing in my estimate, so there is no diminution of commitment. So that's increasing. They have also, Mr. Magua pointed out the concept of composite score is very important, but I think it's a bit technical for rest of the people. What it says is that out of 100, you should be able to give it a score, and that would require you to have a weighted average of performance, and that methodology is now widely accepted. Everyone agrees. We haven't seen any opposition to it. I don't think in a virtual symposium that is to be presented, but that's what he means. It is a tried and tested methodology, and he's using it. Everyone that I know is using, and that's the big difference, that the first round of new public management got us to this point. They changed the mindset, but they did not think about the nuts and bolts of how to do this. Just getting from being an administrator to a manager to having titles and to have performance agreements, it seemed like that would do it. They did not bother that in spite of all their efforts, they did not know at the end that 5 people would not agree whether this performance was good, bad, or ugly. There would be massive analysis, and you could look at it either way. And so that remained, they have overcome that by calling it composite score. I mean, this is something technical people in this area understand, but those who are interested will be happy to. Now, I know we have till 10:15, and but time is really running ahead of us at this point. So can we, Arun, if I know there are questions, can we take just one question, and then we have to go to Barbados after this, which is again a mind-boggling experience happening as we speak. So Arun, can you read out a question?
Sure, Dr. Trivedi. So we've received, thank you again, Mr. John Magua, for a fascinating presentation. So the question from the audience is, how do we sustain, how do we institutionalize the performance measurement and sustain it across the administration? And part of the question is also, what is the plan of the Commonwealth to encourage member nations to grow GPMS managers?
Well, maybe we could start with the second one, and then for sustaining, they have done an excellent job of sustaining. So I'm also curious how they have sustained. Mr. Magua, how did you manage to do it for 17 years when many countries I know gave up after 5-6 years and things have been reversed, but you have managed to consistently, and we like to know about that. But the Commonwealth question, we can put it at the end. We will answer that. Let's move on.
Thank you very much. Now, for me to answer that question, I would go back to history, the 2004 history that I shared with you at the beginning, because when our departed president came on board and his regime indicated that he needed a system that would hold public officers to account for the resources at their disposal. And therefore, there was both top political and bureaucratic support in entrenching performance contracting in Kenya. Now, successful governments have realized that performance contracting is able to assist the regimes deliver their mandates. The current regime that took over from our departed president came with a blueprint called the Big Four Agenda. And the president then asked, how do we ensure that we implement this, my agenda, Big Four Agenda? And the straight answer that he was given by the bureaucrats is, can we ensure that these are entrenched in performance contracting, so that every institution that has a mandate to implement the Big Four Agenda has to ensure that every year they have clear performance indicators and clear performance targets that then end into their performance contracts. And knowing that at the end of the year, there'll be an evaluation and a release of the results, then you can only imagine that any institution that then has a pie of that commitment has to do it right, because they have then to account why did they not achieve what was assigned to them. So the straight answer for me, I would say that culture that began in 2004 has permeated different regimes, and every regime that comes on board has realized the power of performance contracting in executing the mandate or the manifesto of incoming government.
Thank you very much. I think we will have to answer other questions right at the end, because now we have come where we were to start with in terms of timing, and we've used our time very well, but we need to use it better now moving forward. So thank you, Mr. Magua. It's never enough for me to listen to you, and we will continue. So please wait. We will have these question and answers at the end of the session. But now allow me to move on to Barbados, where we are absolutely greatly honored that one of their most distinguished and dynamic ministers, the Honorable Dr. Shantal Munro-Knight, will be with us. She is a member of the Prime Minister's cabinet in Barbados, Mia Motley, and you know, she will explain to you how important it is to the Prime Minister, and therefore you will realize that why she has been given this responsibility. And Barbados is our newest poster child, which very soon will be leading best practice, in my view, given the commitment. And Dr. Munro-Knight will explain to us why that is likely to happen. Doctor, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so very much, Professor Trivedi, and those expectations, you know, are very high. And I want to say thanks as well to all the distinguished colleagues that are on and the host for this symposium and this discussion. Certainly, Professor Trivedi, I mean, there are already lots of lessons for us to learn and to be able to take away from this discussion. I have a colleague who should be on and should be putting up the PowerPoint. So I'm assuming that's going to come very, very, very soon.
Okay.
But even as that
That Miss Ntema or someone else? There it is.
Yeah.
Sorry, but not Miss Sandra Phillips, of course.
Yes, thank you. If you can put it from the slideshow.
Yes,
from
we can see it.
Mm-hmm.
We have to put it on presentation mode.
On presentation mode. Just go to the slideshow.
Yeah. At the bottom also.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to the right-hand bottom where there's a screen. You can click on that and that will take you right at the bottom. Yeah, on the right-hand side. Or at the top, it says slideshow.
Yeah, if you go to the top and it says slideshow, you just go from the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah, but you can go to this presentation mode. The next one. Ms. Phillips, if you go to the bottom right-hand corner, yeah, then you see a screen there. Yeah.
Sorry, Professor Trivedi, I know that we are pressed for time. It perhaps just be useful if I, you know, as we try to work through putting up the slides, I can go through the first couple as we do, because I think it's important just in terms of time. The first couple of slides, colleagues, would have just provided a brief profile of Barbados, our location, the area, and our population. So Barbados is a small island developing state of 431 square kilometers. And if I say 431 square kilometers, then you know that small is indeed an apt description. Our population currently is just about 300,000 or so, 269,000 officially. We are a former British colony, and we're also perhaps the world's newest parliamentary republic, having become a republic on the 30th of November, 2021. Yeah. Our current head of state is a president, and of course, as you would have indicated, led quite ably by the Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Amour Montley. If you can go to the next slide. We have a bicameral legislature with an appointed 21-member Senate, which is the upper chamber, and the elected 30-member House of Assembly, which is the lower chamber. So very, very much mirroring the British system. We have 19 ministries of central government with several departments falling under them, and I think similar to other colleagues. Again, the composition of the ministries and departments will change as governments come in and different priorities and mandates are set. We can see those departments and ministries shifting in terms of composition and in terms of responsibilities as well. Under those departments and ministries, we also have various statutory bodies, including commercial and non-commercial state-owned enterprises. As most small economies, we are highly vulnerable, open to exogenous shocks, and also as well, heavily dependent on one sector, and for Barbados, that is tourism. Next slide. Colleagues, I want to talk about the significance of public service delivery to Barbados, because I think there's an important context to ground why it is that performance management is important. I think as most post-colonial societies, certainly the public sector is a key driver of both economic and social development. And that has important implications in the context for how the country and how the public service works and how it is managed, yeah? Currently, Barbados is implementing a major restructuring initiative called the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan. And as a homegrown plan, what it has allowed us to do is not only just focus on the fiscal elements and focus on the issue of transformation of the public service, just only in the context of retrenchment, because traditionally that has been the particular context when we talk about doing transformation in the, in the context of restructuring. What it has allowed us to do is to kind of take a very, very critical look at what are the systemic issues in the context of non-performance, in the context of service delivery, etc. And that reflection certainly has solidified for us that the performance of the public sector is very, very much tied to all of the other targets that we want to meet in the context of our economy, in the context of delivery of welfare needs to our system, to our citizens rather, in the context of increasing investment. And so that having that strategic look means that for the government, the need to transform the public sector was then a priority. Next slide. Next slide, please. And I want to say to talk about from where, perhaps from where we are starting, before we looked at introducing the CFR process. So that there was an absence of arrangement for holistic evaluation of organizational performance within the government. So that we had some systems in place so that, for instance, there was a system for individual, and this perhaps mirrors Namibia's process, that was called the Performance Review Development System, PRDS, and it was introduced over 20 years ago. But despite the fact that we had the introduction of the system 20 years ago, it wasn't fully institutionalized. It has been used on an ad hoc basis, and even up to 2021, less than half of the ministries were actually applying it as well. Yeah. So outside of that, so we have that process of individual performance review, which was not then tied to organizational performance review, as was indicated as one of the key principles by Professor Trivedi. So we have that. But then we also had as well a system for organizational planning, monitoring, and review. So some systems in place where the government process has been constructed around the preparation of estimates of revenue and expenditure, and with each MDA required to create a program budget document which would outline the vision and the mission of the MDA, the objectives, etc. Yes, and including key performance indicators. We do have an estimates committee which would review the program budget, a management accounting unit that monitors performance of the state-owned entities, and a mid-year review process. So all of these mechanisms, but still the critical analysis suggested that they weren't allowing us to have the real structured and coherent level of performance review that was needed in order to move the needle. Yeah, so existing processes were still faulty, and that I think was also one of the propelling arguments for us to look and see what else we could do in order to strengthen the performance and, like I said, move the needle in terms of enhancing government performance and, importantly, as well, accountability, because that's extremely important. Yeah, next slide. I won't talk too much here in terms of the rationale for adopting the CFR, except to say, and to perhaps go back to that point that I talked about accountability. Ensuring accountability is one of the key principles of this government. Yeah, and in so doing, we are 100% committed to making sure that it is system-wide. And not only in terms of accountability, but that accountability then has to be tied to a process that will allow us to have a citizen-centric focus in terms of the public service. So that essentially was one of the grounding motivations for the use of the CFR, program. There are other areas there as identified on the slide, but I do want to indicate again, because of the government's focus on accountability, focus on engendering a citizen-centric culture. That was critical in looking at the CFR framework and being able to identify that this framework would allow the government to be able to deliver this, as we dealt also with all the other fundamentals of performance management. Next slide. As Professor Trivedi has alluded to, the government's commitment to the CFR framework, sometimes, and I'll be very honest, sometimes as government we can pronounce but not act. This government was very decided that it would not do that, to the extent that within the government's manifesto of the very recent general elections of January 19th, 2022, there is a specific statement, there's a specific section within the manifesto that references the commitment for results framework, and it actually identified 7 key goals in relation to this framework and performance management. Yeah, and that then is the framework that will guide the public service implementation of the commitment for results framework and performance management. And as Professor Trivedi has said, the Prime Minister then doubled down on that with actually then assigning me as minister in order to move the process forward, and as well with a specific permanent secretary as well in order to move the process forward. And you can see those identified goals and objectives there as identified in the manifesto, which looked at clear expectations from all governments to know what results are expected from them, expectations from each ministry, department, and agency. They are to be documented in the commitment for results program document. Again, the accountability for delivery of results, coordination among government entities. And Professor Trivedi, I think if you would see that these are reflective of the principles that you would have identified at the very beginning, again, in terms of the whole of government approach and team targets, etc. Next slide. And again, as we discussed and some of the other presentations, incentivizing to deliver results, also as well in terms of making sure that, again, one of the key principles that the framework is embedded within budget considerations as well. And of course, service orientation, that the CFRs would include service charters and grievance redress mechanisms to ensure that MDAs serve citizens more effectively. Next slide. I also want to indicate that, again, looking at the seriousness of government to this effort. So in the President's address on the occasion of the opening of Parliament on the 4th of February 2022, again, the government doubled down on its commitment, and in that address, on the core values, core value 2, it was indicated that government must deliver for all. And in the context of deliver for all, establishing a framework that creates a people-centered culture that is fair, transparent, and inclusive, and speaks specifically to incentivizing the public and private sectors to enhance performance, was actually also clearly identified. Next slide. So what are the institutional arrangements that have been made in order to institutionalize the performance management framework? So as I indicated before, we have the assignment of a permanent secretary for the CFR, the appointment of the minister, the cabinet approval for various proposals for institutional arrangements, and this was very recent as well. So cabinet again has signed off, and I want to indicate here again in terms of the government commitment. So while we would have participated in the training that was provided previously, the Prime Minister again has mandated that all of our government ministers be further retrained so that they can lead the process within their departments, again, because the commitment is to institutionalize the process from a very high leadership perspective. So again, coming from the Prime Minister's office, but ensuring that all government ministers as well have a clear understanding so that they can lead. Additionally as well, the cabinet has agreed that all of the CFRs, the strategic plans, etc., must be signed off at the ministerial level as well in this respect. Next slide. I know that we're at time, so I'm moving through quickly. So I wanted to come, Professor Trivedi and colleagues, perhaps just looking at some challenges and perhaps the way forward in terms of incorporating the performance management framework within the public sector. So I do want to say, that this is very much about changing culture, which takes quite a bit of time. And what our government is seeking to do as well is not just taking the CFR process by itself, but we are building what I term a full ecosystem of support. So along with the measures that we have there, the government has also tasked on our Learning and Development Department to roll out a level of leadership training as well for our public servants. Alongside that, the government has also established a national training initiative. And that national training initiative then is also open to public service and the private sectors. And as well, it is doubling down on that effort in terms of retraining about the best practices for leadership, performance management, and etc. So we are building out this ecosystem. Alongside that effort as well, the government has also as well looking to see how it can further open additional measures for accountability and involvement of citizens so that the CFR process becomes embedded in a whole of government framework that drives accountability. One of the elements before I start, colleagues, that I want to indicate is the effort as well to make sure that there is ownership of this within the MDAs, yeah? So we have been very careful to make sure that we continue to engage, not only in the exercise of training, not only in the exercise of process and systems, but in the exercise also of listening and reflection, so that our MDAs will own this process. Governments will change, but unless we ensure that there is full institutionalization of the process, then we will have an effort where we put a lot of energy into, but then is not then streamlined within the government process. So that even where we have sought to do so at the cabinet level through legislation, etc., the effort is really then to kind of make sure there's full ownership and buy-in of the process through MDAs and through leaders within the public service as well. And I'll stop there. Thank you so very much for the time.
Thank you, Minister. That is absolutely fascinating. And you're being modest. Allow me to mention that the Minister mentioned that this was part of the election manifesto of the Prime Minister's Labour Party. But she did not mention that, an amazing democracy that Barbados is, they won 100% of all the seats. I'm not saying it's because you had CFR in your manifesto. You're doing many right things, and this happens to be one of the right things that you're doing. So that gives us hope that this, one cannot say in Barbados, there is lack of political commitment. Often academics write papers and say, well, in theory, this was great, but there was no political commitment. In this case, if it doesn't work, it is not because of political commitment, whatever it may be. There is so much political commitment I've never seen in any country that I have worked. So that is a given. Now it is up to us, to the technocrats, to really deliver what the politicians have clearly demanded that this needs to be done. Thank you, Minister. That was brilliant, and in very short order, you have summarized it so well. Thank you. Minister, maybe we'll take just one question because we do have two presentations, and we'll have to compress those, because once you start enjoying and you think you have time, you suddenly run out of time, and that's what happens. So if there is any question, otherwise we can come back with all other presentations. We have Nigeria and then Bangladesh to make the presentation. Professor Manoharan, is there any question? I think you're saying that we'll take the questions at the end. There are, but we will. Minister, is that all right? Will that be okay that we finish the presentations and then otherwise we may go into a long discussion? That's okay? All right. Okay, that's great. In that case, we will go to Dr. Emmanuel Meribole, who's a permanent secretary in Nigeria, and an enthusiast as much as anyone I have seen. And I've known him for a long time, and they're doing some remarkable work. They've had, of course, many programs, a retreat on performance management. Dr. Meribole, we will have to request you to summarize it quickly so that we can have a little bit time for discussion. You can give the highlights, and as I've promised, we will share this. And for those who are interested, we can have another session offline where we can discuss these things at greater length. And this is close to our heart, and everyone on the panel would be willing to spare time to discuss this further. Dr. Meribole, the floor is yours. If you can do it in less than 10 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Trivedi, and my condolences to our Kenyan colleagues. Let me start by saying I'm going to be very brief, but I want my presentation background to talk about profile of Nigeria so that we will understand where Nigeria is. Also look at the situation of government performance management system and the situation before our collaboration with the Commonwealth Secretariat and what our current thinking is now. Then we look at key changes in our plan, key challenges and way forward. Of course, like people that know Nigeria, Nigeria is a country of 923,768 kilometers, bordered by the Gulf of Guinea. It's a West African country. And you also have Benin on the west, Cameroon on the east, and Chad on the northeast. It's a federal republic of 36 states, made up of federal capital territory, 774 local government areas. Our population is about 225 million, going by the 2021 estimate. In fact, it's the most populous country in Africa. And we operate a federal system of government since 1999 after decades of military rule. We have 3 tiers of government: the federal, the state, and the local government areas. And of course, we have 3 arms of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. What is important is that these levels of government, federal, state, and the local government areas are independent. And at the federal level, we have 43 ministries, extra ministerial departments at the federal level, with many agencies and parastatals under them. Our capital city is Abuja, and of course, the economic hub is Lagos. But permit me to say that in government performance management system, Nigeria can be said that since independence, we have followed the bureaucratic model fashioned up after our colonial experience, where performance of public service follows a traditional bureaucratic organizational structure. What is important here is also that the capacity of administrators to respond to the needs of the public and fulfill their expectations, particularly with respect to public service delivery, is dependent on this traditional bureaucracy. And as we heard in the morning, the performance of government lies in the eyes of the beholder. So with the democratic dispensation, what we are hearing about government performance by the citizens is that government has fallen short of expectation, government is inefficient, government is not doing well at all. And this led the government of President Olusegun Obasanjo in 1999 to introduce what they call the Servicom Initiative. Again, successive governments after President Olusegun Obasanjo, like Yar'Adua administration, that was continued by President Jonathan in 2012 to 2015, introduced a performance contract approach. The next government that came on board, which is the present government in 2015, started with an efficiency unit approach that later became a performance agreement approach. And now we are looking at a whole of government performance management system where we combine employee performance management system with a performance agreement system, or what we call the institutional performance agreement. So these are some of the initiatives that the government of Nigeria has introduced in a series of years from 1999 to date in order to institute a form of accountability in government and improve performance of government. I'll just go through and briefly describe each of this and also look at our collaboration with the Commonwealth Secretariat that led to our current thinking. Of course, like I said, the Servicom initiative aimed at service compact with all Nigerians, where we look at the mission, vision of government, and from there, agree on promises the different federal institutions will make to the citizens of the country based on their mandate. And these are very visible in the charter, what they call service charter with the people. All federal MDAs were mandated to have this charter, and this guided their service delivery to the people. Now, the most important thing is, how do we measure their performance? Was there an objective way of doing it? The answer is no. But again, government had a way of subjectively measuring the performance. And during the time of President Obasanjo, some ministers lost their portfolio because they were said not to be performing. So there was a consequence management attached to it. But in 2012, based on the Vision 2020 document of Nigeria, the then President Jonathan decided to hold ministers accountable for the performance of their sectors. Again, he started by looking at the National Planning Commission and having what we call a monitoring and evaluation department that introduced objectives, key performance indicators drawn from this Vision 2020 documents. So ministers were allowed through a dialogue to agree on things they were supposed to be held accountable for. Again, there was nothing like what we call criteria values. The government knew what they expected from them. However, agreements were signed between the ministers, Mr. President, and this was
Dr. Meribole, I think, Dr. Meribole, we may have to speed up and just come to the end because I think the next session is coming up. So, you know, if you can just summarize at the end, just the main.
Okay.
Yeah. You have already described these approaches now. Yeah.
So we had done the performance contract approach, but in this present administration, we started with an efficiency approach. And in 2019, we now started with what we call a performance agreement approach. However, this is spearheaded by the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation. Ministers are held accountable for certain KPIs. And we introduced employee performance management system, which was a little bit independent from institutional performance management system. In April, towards end of March this year, up to April 1, we had a collaboration with the Commonwealth Secretariat, where government performance management system, we are taking through it, and all the permanent secretaries, the head of the civil service of the Federation, was part of this workshop. And at the end of the day, what came to be is that the 16 generally agreed performance principles we have to be what we need to use. And in fact, post-workshop, what we have agreed to do is to have a comprehensive coverage in our commitment for results that will include both financial and non-financial aspects of performance. We need to prioritize tasks based on the mandate of each ministry with graded values that will lead to a composite score and objective way of measuring performance. We need to establish a commitment of a community of practice through the canvas so that we institutionalize the gap. And we also need to handhold the departments or the ministries through the Department of Performance Management to be able to institutionalize performance management system. And of course, review performance management policy that we have now and the guidelines so that it will be in line with recent knowledge from the workshop. Let me also state that linkage of the institutional performance and employee performance is one of the things which we think the gap will help us do. However, we envisage some key challenges. Inadequate political will at the highest level, because at times trying to link two independent offices, even though both of them are in the presidency, e.g., the office of the head of service is in the presidency, the office that also looks at the ministerial mandates is also in the presidency. We need to have adequate political will to link them together. Again, we have entered our election period in Nigeria. What you see on the, what you see now in all the television places and what have you is electioneering campaign. So we need to manage this. There's inadequate infrastructure for us to actually have a whole of government performance management system. The importance of technology cannot be overemphasized. Again, we need adequate budgetary support, and we keep on doing the change management through improving the knowledge of people. So these are some of the key challenges, but the way forward, like I said, is to institutionalize all the 16 generally accepted principles of performance management and also to collaborate with the Commonwealth going forward. In conclusion, let me say that we have received a lot of support from the head of the Civil Service of the Federation. We're also receiving support from the Commonwealth Secretariat, and we are working together with the cooperation of all the permanent secretaries to ensure that we institutionalize government performance management system in Nigeria. Let's not forget, we're also learning good practices from the Kenya example. I'll be comparing notes as we move forward to institutionalize government performance management system. I want to thank you for listening. Maybe during the question and answer, I can provide more clarifications to things I hurriedly overlooked. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we will have to postpone the questions to offline. And if you give me the permission, I just want to put Arun for a minute, the share permission.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, yeah. And so Dr. Meribole, if you can take this out, thank you very much. I will summarize. I mean, you have seen the transition that is taking place. You're seeing the trend as being described, because the title of this was International Trends in Performance Management. You're seeing those right away. Now, I just want to quickly, just to be fair to my most dear friend, and that's why I kept him, knowing that we might have a problem of time. And if you are seeing, this is the Dr. Manoharan, can you see it?
Yes, yes, Dr. Trivedi.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Islam, are you online? Mr. Nazrul Islam? You have to unmute him, Arun or Mary.
Yes, I have unmuted him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr.
Thank
Islam?
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Are you there?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how much time. I don't think we have much time, Mr. Islam. Just maybe a broad this thing, and maybe we'll have to discuss. I don't want to have a domino effect. So because you're the dearest, and the country with which I've had the most loving relationship, it'll be easier for me to say that if you can just give one or two highlights of what was the change before and after the introduction, and I think that would be good enough.
Okay. Thank you, please. Okay. Thank you very much. We know that we are out of time and we have already entered to the next session. So I will be very brief. So this is the structure. Most of the previous presenters use this structure. So next slide, please. You can see Bangladesh is surrounded by India. So a small country with a population of 166 million. And to the up right, the Bhutan, another neighboring country is there. So please, next slide. The background. Back in 2000, the first report of Public Administration Reforms Commission, they mentioned about the annual performance agreement or the government performance management system. Gradually, it was discussed in the 6th five-year plan, National Integrated Strategy, and the SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, the cabinet secretaries, and finally, it was introduced in 2015. Before that, the groundbreaking workshop in India in 2013, led by Dr. Prajapati Trivedi, that actually triggered the introduction of this system in Bangladesh. So in evolution, in 2014-15, the AP was introduced in 48 ministries, and gradually it has increased. It has covered most the 52 ministries, and at present it is in 3-layer or 3-tier. The ministry division at the top, the government organizations and statutory bodies, and very recently the field administrations are also included in this. So the expansion is a major trend here. So sir, the next slide. 52 ministries, as I mentioned, and now the total number of entities is more than 17,000. So you can imagine the coverage. Next slide, please, sir. This structure, this is the standard structure followed by most of the countries. So the this is also mentioned by Kenya. In a nutshell, I can say the most of the experience in Bangladesh is common to Kenya. So this, you can see the 5-point scale as mentioned by Kenya, and also elaborated by Dr. Prajapati Trivedi. Calculation of composite score, it is also Dr. Trivedi mentioned, it is some sort of technical, but I think it is known to all. The composite score is calculated by adding weighted score of all indicators. So, next slide. Foundation of APA, Annual Performance Agreement. Like any other countries, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Election Manifesto, Perspective Plan, all these are the foundation of Annual Performance Agreement in Bangladesh.
And foundation means the sources. Yeah, these are the sources of information.
Thank you, sir. So, the most strength in Bangladesh is the political commitment. I've seen the Honorable Prime Minister. She spends the full day when the contract is signed. It is in front of her. So it gives a strong message to others, the very strong commitment, political commitment of the government. Next slide, please. Regional comparison, it was done by the Commonwealth Secretariat, and it has been mentioned by Dr. Trivedi earlier, so I will not spend time on it. And
I mean, I think this was done by, to be fair, Mr. Islam, this was done by the participants of a workshop in which ranked Bangladesh as the best. So if you have to go and do a study tour, I would suggest go to Bangladesh. There, everybody thought they had the best system in that workshop.
Okay. Thank you. For the interest of time, let me stop now. Maybe I can request Dr. Trivedi at the end, as he knows the Bangladesh case more than anybody else, maybe more than, in some cases, more than the practitioners. So he can add some points at that.
Well, and what we will do is we will, thank you, Mr. Islam. Mr. Islam is very modest. His role cannot be overemphasized. At some point, we will have to do. But at this point, we will have to just thank the participants and the patience of the organizers, as we have run out of time. It is such an enjoyable thing for all of us that it's very hard to manage time when you're having fun. But I thank each and every one of the panelists. We will continue this discussion. Anyone interested, please write to us. We will be happy to have part 2 of this discussion anytime, anywhere that people wish to have. Thank you, Professor Manoharan. My apologies, Mary Gibson. Please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Trivedi. Thank you, dear panelists. That was a wonderful session, very informative with a lot of examples. As we can see, there are many examples of GIPRA type frameworks across the world. And it is our hope that we document each of these in many countries, and we gather the lessons learned and share for implementing better performance measures. Thank you.